A couple of weeks ago, I had what appeared to be a past life dream. So I thought I'll go for past life regression hypnosis and get some more details. So today, I want to share with you the research I've done because I want to know, were my past life memories actually real, or do I just have an overactive imagination? Hello. It's Carol Ann Chapman. I'm the author of When We Were Gods. It's a chronicle of my past life memories of Atlantis. All right, so here is the list of the details from that past life dream and hypnosis session. To begin, I was wearing a dress that had a bustle. Secondly, the bustle had frills piled on the back of it. My dress had a high neck and long sleeves. The bustle bounced when I walked. I wore my hair up. I was going to meet my husband at a ship which had square sails and tall masts. Ships were docked along the land. My husband wore a top hat. My husband had a jacket that looked something like tails. My husband's work included financing sailing ships. I wore silk shoes. My house was Victorian. I lived in Boston. I walked on a sidewalk that looked very similar to present-day sidewalks. My name was Eleanor or something like that. All right, let's start with the bustle, because my preliminary research has shown me that the bustle was worn by women only for a very or relatively short time, like from 1869 to about 1900. Evidently, once the bicycle was invented in 1905, nobody wanted to have a bustle anymore, because how could you ride a bicycle with a bustle? Here is a video from a wonderful channel called Duchess Melanda. She is a seamstress and she loves the era of the bustle. So she makes various dresses and also models them. Here she is showing what it took in 1885 to put a dress on that had a bustle. And in this video, you can actually see the bustle, and you can see how it would be possible that when you walked with it, it would have bounced. Now I'm going to speed to the end of her video, which is just a short video, and the link to that video, if you want to see the whole thing, is down below in the description. But as you can see, once she's all dressed up, she is wearing a dress that has a high collar and long sleeves, as I said, and a bunch of frills on the back of the bustle. Now, just in case you're curious about bustles now, because while I was doing all this research, I actually got really curious about bustles because they are outrageous as far as I'm concerned. And one of my big questions was, how do you sit in a bustle? It turns out you actually can sit quite easily in a bustle. This is a video from another wonderful YouTube channel called Prior Attire. And the video is called Dressing Up in a Second Bustle Era, circa 1887. Now, this bustle looks more like a cage, but take a look. She has no trouble sitting down. And that's because the bustle sort of folds up. It condenses itself. Again, here's the finished ensemble. The frills are on top of the bustle. She has a high neck and long sleeves. I said I also wore my hair up. Now here is a photograph of an actual woman in around 1885. She's wearing a bustle, her hair's up, the neck is high, her sleeves are long. And I actually used this photo for the thumbnail that went with this video. However, I have no reason to believe that this woman in the photo is who I was in my past life memory, although she could have been. Well, I'm happy to say that it looks as if what I saw in my dream and in my past life regression actually are correct as far as what a dress was like when women wore bustles. So let's go on to the next points, which have to do with historical sailing ships. Now, I love these kind of ships. They are so beautiful. They've got those tall masts, the square sails, and they right away make you think of pirates. And I love movies about pirates. You might too, Pirates of the Caribbean and that kind of thing. Actually, I grew up on movies about pirates. My mother's favorite movie was called The Spanish Main. It starred Paul Unread and Maureen O'Hara. And it was all about swashbuckling and swords. And of course, he loved her and carried her away onto his ship. So anyway, I'm getting carried away. So here now I'm wondering, could it be that my husband in that past life memory of mine was a swashbuckling pirate? Well, my research showed that the golden age of pirates was way long ago in the 1700s, about 150 years before the Bustle. So there's no way that sailing ships that were sailed by pirates occurred at the same time as women wearing bustles. However, I did not dream, or in my past life regression hypnosis, there was nothing about pirates. That is just me in my waking life, that I like pirates. It turns out, though, that at the time of the Bustle, 1869 to 1900, there were sailing ships with square sails and tall masts. So it does fit with the time period of the Bustle. Now, by then, steamships had appeared or had been invented. The thing is that sailing ships were still used, and especially for long-distance voyages, say from Europe to Australia and back again, because with a steamship, you would need to have space in the hull of the ship to carry all the coal and the water to make the steam, whereas with a sailing ship, all you needed was the wind, and therefore the sailing ships could go a much longer distance through the ocean without refueling. I am happy to say that bustles and tall-masted sailing ships did occur at the same time. Now, one of the things that bothered me about my memory of this past life in my past life dream and past life regression hypnosis was that the ship, the sailing ship, was docked along the shore. My present husband and I have done some sailing in our lives. And we know that one of the biggest issues with a sailboat or any kind of boat is how deep the draft is, how deep it goes into the water. Well, one of these big sailing ships would have had quite a deep draft. So normally, the closer you get to land, the shallower the water is. So when I've been looking at these this research that I was doing about sailing ships, I thought, it's got to just be my making things up, my imagination, because certainly, surely, it couldn't have been that a big ship with a deep draft couldn't be docked right beside the land. Although I have to tell you, a number of years ago when my husband and I were in London, we went to a restaurant on an old ship that was docked right along the land. It was on the Thames River. We had a great time, and we had mushy peas for the first time. Delicious. It does show that there were many ships that were moored, is that the right word? Whatever, that were tied up right along the shore. So that is another point that continues to support the idea that what I was remembering could actually be a real memory. So I can feel comfortable that the details about the Bustle and the tall ships, that they were coincident with each other at the same time period. Now let's go on to my husband. Now, I actually didn't dream about my husband. My husband came up in the past life regression hypnosis, and he had a top hat, and he also had something that seems strange to me, because see, here's this picture I found online of a man in the 1880s. He's wearing a top hat, as I saw my husband wear a top hat, but this man is wearing what you could call a top coat. But what I saw in my past life regression, my husband in the past life regression was wearing something that looked like a jacket, like it had tails, as it was sort of cut out in the front, almost as if he had tails. And I thought, this proves that it couldn't be a past life. And I had to do a lot of searching about this. And finally, I found something called a cutaway. Actually, in England, it was called a morning coat. It's something you'd wear in the morning, and I believe it's cut away because people were still riding horses. So it's much easier to ride a horse if you don't have this big coat in front of you while you're sitting on the horse. All right, yay, so we can just keep going forward. Now, the other thing I said was that my husband was not a sailor. He was not the captain of one of these sailing ships, but that he provided financing for these kind of ships. He might have even owned some of them. I wasn't quite sure on the details, but I think that's very possible. The fact is, if there were sailing ships, there had to be people who own the sailing ships. Just like nowadays, there are people who own the ships, and there are people who provide the financing for ships and for travel and for commerce. So that fits, that makes sense. I said I wore silk shoes. Now, I couldn't find a public domain image of a silk shoe to show you from 1880. But here is one from a time earlier than 1880, and we still wear silk shoes for special occasions like weddings, silk shoes or satin shoes. So I am pretty sure they wore silk shoes in the 1880s as well. Now, I said my house was a Victorian house. Were there Victorian houses at the same time as the Bustle? Well, the Bustle was in the Victorian era, so it totally makes sense that I would have had a Victorian home. And in fact, this pink Victorian home is quite a bit the kind of house that I remembered in my past life dream, only my house, I think, was painted a light yellow color, like a lemon yellow color, and the porch wasn't half as fancy as this picture is here. Finally, I said I lived in Boston in the New World. There is a Boston in England as well, and it at one time was second to London as far as imports and exports. So I looked into, could it have been Boston in England? But actually, in the hypnosis session, I said, I'm pretty sure it was in the New World. So Boston, Massachusetts. We're at the second last item, and it is that I walked on a sidewalk very similar to the kind of sidewalks we have now. And do you want to know? This was the detail that tripped me up the most, because I kept looking for images of sidewalks in Boston. And I would do a search on Google for a concrete sidewalk in Boston. And finally I found out that it turns out there were no concrete sidewalks in Boston. You know what a concrete sidewalk looks like? It has these partitions between these sort of plates of concrete. They pour, actually, the construction guys don't pour concrete, they place concrete. So they place the concrete and then they make these sort of seams in between the different plates of concrete. So I was like, oh, man, I'd gone through all those details. They lined up with it being during the time of the Bustle, and now I get to the sidewalk, and it turns out there couldn't have been a sidewalk during the time of the Bustle. Well, fortunately, I did come across something in a historical website. It was of sidewalks made of granite slabs, and they were in Boston. And they looked very much like present-day concrete sidewalks. And in fact, they're probably still around, maybe cracked a little bit, not totally level because of frost and all that kind of stuff. But it turns out that there were sidewalks, after all, in Boston. It's just that they were not the kind of modern day sidewalks we have made out of concrete, but they were made of granite slabs. Well, that's similar to a granite kitchen countertop, except they wouldn't have been as fancy or as pretty. They were just gray colored. And it wasn't that they had a seam between them, it's that they were individual slabs of granite placed one after another so that there was a seam between them like that. Well, that was just about everything, except that I called myself Eleanor or something like that. And I did find out that Eleanor was a woman's name. I mean, Eleanor in the U.S. was a woman's name as long ago as the Boston Tea Party in the late 1700s, when the United States was fighting for its independence against England. The ship where the Boston Tea Party was held was called the Eleanor. So for sure, if the name Eleanor existed in the late 1700s, it existed in the 1800s as well. I'm excited to see that it was very possible that my past life memories from my dream and my past life regression hypnosis could very well have been accurate. Now, I didn't tell you everything about that past life dream, because in that past life, it turned out I had a tragic, violent end. So in my next video, I'm going to talk about how I came to a violent end in that past life. I hope you enjoyed this. I know I really enjoyed doing the research. And see you in the next video. Toodaloo. Bye-bye.